I want to first start by thanking everybody for attending today and thank our previous panelists from our first and our second episode of Gray Eye, Rewire or Retire. It has been a fun journey. It's hard to believe it's already been 2 months since our first kickoff and a month since the previous episode. It seems like the days go by so quickly, and here we are already at episode 3, where we are focusing on the power of our data strategy and AI. So just a little bit of a recap, though, as we're thinking about what is our goal here with Rewire or Retire. We are really looking to establish a safe, comfortable place for us to talk as Gen X baby boomer leaders about the disruption of AI in all of our industries. We want to alleviate the fear so that people can start to take steps forward, beginning to take steps leveraging AI for their own personal and professional benefit. And we talked about in the very first session how this cohort has experienced the greatest disruption of technological transformation in the last 40 years of any cohort in the history of humankind, as far as we know. I know there's theories about the Egyptians and prior to that, so who knows? But as far as we know right now, this cohort has experienced the greatest disruption, and we've succeeded. We've thrived, in fact. We've managed to be adaptable and to continue moving forward. We went from the rotary phone and now we're all the way to AI with breakdancing pants somewhere in the middle, we've talked about. And, so what we want to say is that, again, let's lead with curiosity. That was our second session, trying to dispel some of that fear and really rewire our brains to think through more of a curious lens rather than a fearful lens, and to begin to take action. So coming out of today, we wanted to establish, what does it mean to have strategic data thinking along with AI implementation? And one thing that we did talk about just in our pre-sessions, as Val established, we've been dealing with dirty data for 40 years. This is not a new topic. And I think we'll have to count how many times I will be saying dirty data, because it's just so fun. This is not a new topic. We've all been struggling with the data quality across our roles for as long as we've been in our careers. But what is the impact now as we're moving towards our function of being able to leverage AI with greater output and better outcomes? We want to kind of get to the heart of that, of establishing that, and look at some business cases. We're going to talk through some different examples from our panelists regarding the ways in which they've successfully integrated AI and how they've brought along both technology thinkers and non-technology thinkers for moving their organizations forward through AI. So I want to just pause for a minute and have our panels introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Douglas, for have him up first.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Alexis. So yeah, just to kind of start out with kind of an overall topic or an idea that's been useful to me in the past, as far as talking about building foundations of data and AI and how that's useful and applicable. I grew up with Legos as a kid. I really liked Legos, and for me that really is like data. You can sort it by size, shape, color, function, set, where's it coming from? What is it doing? And oftentimes you get instruction manuals of how when data is coming to you through your software, your platforms, you usually have a little bit of a manual on how it's supposed to look, how you're supposed to use it, but then you can really use it in any sort of way that you want. And that's the versatility of data, right? You can build what was meant for, but you can also build all sorts of other things on top of that and really use your imagination and curiosity to really explore data and have it do things and leverage it in a way that, some people never thought possible. And that's really the power of data, and having it organized and usable in a way that you can actually drive some value out of it. And I think that's kind of what everyone's looking to do, and everyone knows that they should be doing. But getting from where you are now and getting to that kind of vaulted state of being able to utilize your data freely and availably and usefully in the ways that you want to. That's where it can get a little bit murky. And I know Val will talk about dirty data and, inevitably you have sets that you're missing pieces or something's in there that you're like, where did this come from? So I know that we'll talk a little bit about that, but yeah, and you can look at that in many different ways from in terms of like who the people involved, who has touched the data, who needs it, culture. Do you have people that want to use data that really are interested and invested in it, or have no interest? They've done it without data for their whole lives. They don't need it ever. So why do we need this data thing? And then there's obviously a lot of technology, process, and analytics behind all of that that really allows data to sing and tell a story. So I think that those are all important pieces. So hopefully that helps some folks out there.
Yeah, so a couple of things, Douglas, I wanted to focus on, and what you shared was some of the vocabulary that you just used, talking about letting data sing and using imagination. I think most of us don't think about data in that way. And in our last session, I talked about replacing concern with curiosity. So
Okay.
it is really important that we're thinking through a lens that gives us more freedom to be able to take steps forward so that we're not paralyzed. So I wanted to say thank you for sharing that. That was a really great foundation. If you could just really briefly, I'm going to have each panelist just really briefly introduce themselves, tell us what you're up to these days, what your background is, and why it was important to you to be on this panel.
I've been working in analytics in different capacities through roughly 9 different industries for the last 15 years, some with official titles, some not, as needs go. Most recently, I've been in telecommunications and now manufacturing. I currently work for Fortune Brands as a business intelligence engineer, working a lot with our data science teams, our data engineers, and our modelers. And really, as a BI engineer, you kind of have to have a purview of all of it. So that's really kind of where I exist and play with data, is in that kind of more foundational area, right before we strap on AI in terms of what we're talking about in this session. So yeah.
I think it is worthwhile to note that Douglas is not part of our Gen X baby boomer cohort, but he has to help bridge the gap at his organization. So we think that you're a great addition to our panelists here today. So thank you so much, Douglas.
So grateful to be here. Thank you.
Chris, can you please briefly introduce yourself?
This is Chris Rebant. I'm retired now, but I have 40 years in banking, with the focus being on financial reporting of all types. And I actually started when Lotus 123 was your big tool. And now the difference of what it's changed a wee bit over the years. And I've been through a lot of these things with it. And what Doug described was a lot of the same kind of issues that I ran into in those years.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Bill?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill Balderas. I've had the opportunity to work with Alexis for many years. I'm kind of an accidental data guy. I'm a failed journalist, and I took math pass fail in college, so I am certainly not the numbers or data guy, but I love starting and building and growing businesses. And about 10 years ago, I met with some colleagues, decision makers, who all told me they had the same problem, and that was that their data was dirty, disorganized, not visualized, not useful. And I thought, this sounds like a business. So I walked down the street to our friends at Ohio State here and hired a team of data folks. That was 10 years ago. Futurity is the company. We've had great growth. We focus on regulated industries, so healthcare, finance, patient data, the stuff most of our competitors actively will hang up the phone when you call them. So it creates a really blue ocean for us. We work with data that a lot of organizations don't. And then about 3 years ago, we began building our software platform, Huckle, which is its own company, but it is an AI data platform that automates a lot of the data work that Futurity does.
We're happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
We're looking
thank
forward
you.
to hearing more about some of the business cases. Irvin?
Hi, my name is Irvin Rogers. I'm a chief information officer. I recently founded a company called Visionary Resource Group, and data is at the center of everything, right? So, what did the 286 computer call his father? Data.
I think the most data guy laughed the most.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Irvin.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for the lightness. We appreciate it. Val?
Hi, I'm Val. I'm a senior product leader with over a decade of experience in helping to launch, grow, and scale SaaS products across various platforms. And needless to say, over the last 10 plus years, the role of data has always played a huge role. Since I've been given credit for the dirty data, though I don't think I really get all the credit. The dirty data phrase for today, one of the biggest challenges as we've been looking at launching, scaling, growing, implementing products, SaaS products especially, is Alexis. I think you made the point. Bill, I forget if you made the point also, but over each of the last decades, every new generation brings a new perspective on data. And having to somehow meet the data in the middle and to figure out what those pieces are to move forward. And that's why I was really excited about this panel specifically, is that once again, we're finding ourselves at this really interesting inflection point where as a globe, we're trying to influence and direct where we go with technology and how technology solves these problems, but we can't just ignore the data from the past.
Excellent, thank you. I also wanted to have Jason Haller briefly introduce himself before we get to Kate.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason, and I don't have a data background, so that's cool, right? But I guess my data background comes from the health and wellness space, where what was important was capturing results and tracking trends. So data is super important in any kind of change management situation, because if you can't see if whatever your implementation is actually causing a benefit, causing no change at all, or actually making things worse, then what's the point of even doing it if you don't know what effect it's having? Also, being able to stratify data, research data, find the right nuggets of information that actually have value within a dirty data set, like a whole bunch of epidemiological studies that make up the nutrition space. You need to be able to sort through the noise and get to what's actually going to help whatever your situation is. So those skills have somehow translated down the line to now what I do at 5to-Flow, where we're now making an app, chunking metadata into all these things that can actually serve as some kind of coach for people to use and automate their change management. So it's been an interesting journey, but I'm certainly not at the same level of background as some of these other hosts here.
Well, we're happy to have all backgrounds. Thank you, Jason. And Kate?
Well, I wanted to just start with going back to the beginning on the Legos. I've heard there are 3 levels of pain, really bad pain, and stepping on a Lego pain. And I think that's apropos to the going back to also dirty data and why we're here today. I just wanted to share, I'm the founder and CEO of 5to-Flow. Welcome everybody. And we have been running this series to try to avoid pain and see how AI can help us further promote flow and further prevent burnout. And in my career history, bad data, ineffective data, data for the sake of data, information without insights, non-actionable data have been stepping on Lego levels of pain, making decisions, doing activities, running whatever your role is in work with bad information has been a massive pain point across my career. So I'm super excited to talk today about how good data and AI help us promote flow and prevent burnout. So back to you, Alexis, on where we're going with the panel. Thank you all so much for being here.
Well, actually, Kate, I wanted to continue the conversation with you regarding the experience of how important data strategy is to the work that we do at 5to-Flow with our clients and thinking about the 5 core elements. So again, we're talking about just the basic foundation of data outside of even AI, and then we're going to go ahead and layer the AI piece in as we talk about the importance of it for us to help achieve flow and in our professional settings.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So for everybody who doesn't know the story of 5to-Flow and why we're called that, we focus on people, culture, process, technology, and analytics, which encompasses data across all of those. So as humans at work, we are using data all the time in our role, in our strategies, within our culture. You might be a high data, high information culture. And now in the world of AI, how we're managing that. across processes. What data do we need? Just data points from what humans are we working with? What does our client want and need? What is our product? How is it going to evolve? From a tech perspective, what do we need to manage our data, and how are we rolling out AI? And then from an analytics perspective, what are we doing with it? So I know I told a story how Chris and I know each other working back at Huntington, and one of my first lessons on data. And I think in today's modern world, we see this all the time, is depending on how you slice it and dice it and scooch around a Rubik's Cube, you're going to see a lot of different results. In some ways, like you can manipulate data. I know Jason and I talk about this in the health and wellness sphere, that pulling one data point out of a health article could make you make decisions that aren't fully insightful on, eat lots of meat, but not processed meat, or things like that.
Right.
So really love to have us think about the rest of this conversation in that holistic view of the 5 core elements and how AI and data impact us across our roles.
Well, thank you for teeing up that foundation. I think it will be good for us to continue to always come back to the lens of those 5 core elements of people, process, culture, technology, and analytics, as each one is, we think that AI only lives in technology, but we actually understand that there's an impact against each 5 of the core elements. So good to keep returning to that. One of the conversations in our prep meeting that we had with Chris and Val is we were talking about how organizations seem to have this great sense of urgency to have to jump straight into their AI tools right now without even considering their data readiness. I think we all are feeling such pressure. AI is here, we have to take action, but they forget how important it is to think strategically about the sequence of our actions. So I wanted to ask Chris if you had any advice for leaders to help them to think more strategically as they're beginning to activate their data with their AI tools.
Yeah, you have to make sure that what you're at, what exactly do you want?
Mhm.
And I would say that to be make that even a little bit tighter, to say we don't need to build the entire house. Let's just start with the foundation. Let's get some basic things and make sure that works and that everybody kind of buys into it and build from there. And it's also really critical. You have the data people, you have the finance people, this banking side, you have finance people, and then you have people that are making decisions, the salespeople or whomever out there. You really need to make sure they're all tied into this. They don't have to be in every meeting and that kind of thing, but you need to have their input, because there's nothing like building something. Boy, this is really cool. And then you show it to somebody, you spend all this time, you're all happy, and you get up in front of everybody and show it to them, and they go, that's useless because of this, kind of what was said before. You missed this point. So you need to just keep building it out.
Well, I think too, also with conversations we had with Irvin yesterday as well, we talked about how do you bring all of these diverse groups together who have some very, high technological skills, some not. But to Chris's point, we all have to be on the same page, because we're going to, while we may not be working exactly in the same step, the outcome is something we all need to through together. So do you have any insights for leaders in navigating that?
Absolutely. In fact, it's kind of cool because Chris is here. One of my examples is actually working with Chris, where I don't think he's quite used to my approach and my style with regards to working together and being collaborative. I think it was much more along the lines of, IT saw them, what he was doing, and him and his team playing, with data as a threat. And I've always thought about that we're stronger together. That superhero kind of a theme. Avengers has always just been a part of my fabric of how I lead. And so I'll never forget the first time we sat down, and I explained the vision of what I wanted to do. And I think he kind of looked at me with one eye, but we hit the high five, and it was one of the, I think, the building blocks for something that was very, very successful at one of the banks that we worked at together. So I think that it's important that you reach across all lines. Everybody brings a different perspective to the table, and that's something that is just you have to understand the value in that, whether you're an expert or not. There's something that you're going to think about that the other person isn't going to think about. But when you combine all those things together, man, you've got the best gumbo in the world.
Mm. And Val, I know that you stress the importance of asking the right questions up front. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, and I think, to pull off of what Urban was saying, Chris, also the idea of, we've heard this, I think, in some of the other sessions also, Alexis, is that when you start with just the big topic of AI, we heard, I forget which session it was, but it felt overwhelming. Like, where do you start? I think, what I heard from Chris, what I'm hearing from Urban, what my own personal experience is when you feel that overwhelm, maybe take a beat, engage in your curiosity, to what Urban was saying, be curious, ask the questions, collaborate, identify where there are places that you might have that blind spot. And then again, speaking to the majority of us as Gen X boomers coming into it with the experience of saying, where have we perhaps seen this before? Again, not a new experience to be trying something new, not a new experience to have a new technology tool to help us through change. And so how can we help the entire organization or our team identify what is the most important, the most valuable question or problem we're trying to answer or solve? Is AI the right tool to solve that? And then back to Kate's point with the 5 principles within 5 to flow, where does that fit in? And how do we address it within a small space? Because I've heard Jason Holler speak to this also, is small changes each day, right? You do 10 squats on one day. As you slowly build up, the end of a week, at the end of a month, at the end of a program, you've made huge changes. Same idea as you start thinking about where to start and where you want to go.
So one thing I just tag onto that kind of goes back to what Irvin was saying, is it's so important to make sure everybody understands they have a voice. That ask a question. It might seem like it doesn't make a lot of sense, but if you don't understand it, ask the question, because you might see everyone kind of like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that before. I might be the expert on something, but someone asks me a question and go, oh man, I've been so focused on this, I forgot about that. So.
Absolutely. And we talked a lot about that in the last session of, we have to remove this idea about perfectionism from the conversations with AI. The fact is, things are moving so fast. None of us are going to get it perfect, but we can get a lot of it right. But we have to make, the conditions for it to be an open, transparent, trusted environment for people to be able to ask those questions that they're going to say, it's a stupid question, but it actually turns out to be the obvious one that someone needed to say at the time.
Yep.
So, so Bill, thinking about your relationships with your clients and needing to make sure you have the right data strategy going in, you mentioned a lot of times they don't, and that's why they're coming to you. You get to win the business because it is a hot mess. How do you get everybody on the same page? Where do you even start?
Yeah, we've had, it reminds me so much, and everyone on this phone call, I think, was there. 20 years ago, we would get calls from a CMO saying their CEO was on a plane and read an article about Facebook and then said, get us on Facebook. And so, and then 10 people would make Facebook accounts at this organization and no one had the passwords and they would leave. It was kind of a, fire ready aim type of environment. We're seeing the same thing now where CTOs, CIOs, chief data analysts are getting the pressure from the organization to get a specific tool. So it's, hey, we need to get this tool to automate our email responses, automate customer service, to use AI in our supply chain. And the instinct is to start with the tool because it's tangible. So much of our growth, we're having one of maybe our best quarter ever. It has come from companies, and it's usually someone who is saying, let's evaluate what a lot of the other presenters said. Before we go buy a tool and invest in a tool, let's first define the problem. And so what they're bringing us, and they're using different words, but like an AI readiness assessment or workshop, where we are coming in, getting all the stakeholders in the room and saying, let's talk about the problems you're trying to solve first. So we're taking like this 3 or 4 part approach, and then saying, okay, of those, let's prioritize. People keep mentioning voices, so we'll have even like the voting or the post-it notes or whiteboard type scenario. What do we really want to solve? We then go back and say, okay, here are ones that look really solvable within the budget. Here are some options to use, and then we do implementation and training of those tools. So I guess the biggest concern I see our clients have is that impulse to buy a tool or to do something right now and get everyone on it without really prioritizing. So define and prioritize. Prioritize what's first, define what you want to solve, and then work through versus let's buy a tool and hope it was the right tool.
Well said. And I was thinking, Kate and Jason, about the work that we're doing on the AI readiness tools. Are there any additional insights that come from that assessment that you would want to share as we're thinking about how do we know as an organization we're ready to take that next step forward?
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Bill said, because this has been an issue in digital transformation, or maybe any major transformation solution. And I was in a workshop at one point in time and asked these exact issues, Bill. I was like, so why'd you buy this tool? What was the problem? And they're like, our CEO saw the commercial during the Super Bowl and just made us get it. And I was like, oh my God. Like, Val, I know you've been through it.
Yep.
And Urban, our tools in banking. And so when you think about the AI adaptability assessment we're working on, it's far less about what tools do you need and more about what problem are you trying to solve, and then taking you through the journey of what do we need to do to solve that problem holistically. So it's not just going to be a tool. Is this going to change our head count, adding or subtracting? If you're reducing time for each person, like each person on this call, your role is changing. What are you going to do with the newfound time? Are we downsizing? So we have to be honest as a leadership team of, as we implement these new things that are meant to help our jobs be easier and better, is that more client facing time? Is that more strategic analytics time? What are we doing with that, and how is that impacting us as a culture? And in our current assessments, the lowest score in culture is fearing my job's going away with AI. And if that's the fear, you're going to have resistance and adoption. So unless there's clarity with what problem we're trying to solve, how each stakeholder has a role in solving that problem and engaging them in that whole exercise, and then communicating what's changing within each business process. So I used to hand this work to Bill, but now I need to hand it to Urban because we've skipped what Bill used to do because AI is now doing it. And Bill now can go do more selling or do more development. So it's got to be a very holistic story in the steps that Bill mentioned that I put in the chat.
Yeah, and I think it's when we think about our role, if I have to flow as change management leaders, the idea about bringing people along and telling that story from the very beginning. So we've been talking about driving that alignment among all leadership, then driving alignment and buy-in to the overall team as a core piece before you even start taking action with the technology itself. We often 95% of the time in organizations with our clients are missing that first step of through the change management lens. So the importance of change management for successful outcomes with our data and AI. I do want to talk just briefly about some of the basics of, we talked about dirty data. We've also briefly had talked about the quantity versus quality of data. What are some, I'm just going to leave this open to the panel. What are some simple first steps? Again, Val mentioned we can get really overwhelmed. We know we've got messy data, poor quality, but we may have a lot of it. Where do we even start?
A very simple one. One of the things I was responsible for was, call it management accounting, but it used to be costing years ago. And I looked at this one project, and they had one portion of it that had 400 different data points for something that you looked at and go, my God, no wonder people are getting lost in it. It's so detailed, where it took us working with some of the business folks and that to get it down to somewhat less than 100 in a matter of probably 3 or 4 days. Or they're just looking at it and go, this is nuts. We don't use that. That's of no use. That's of no use. And simplified it. And that had a whole impact all the way through that process, because we went back, started pulling other pieces out and really cut the size down to something useful.
And yeah, and I would imagine it went back to what is the problem we're trying to solve? We don't need 400 data points
Right.
to get the answer that we need here. What are the 3 things we need to understand?
That's right. Get it very simplify it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And if I can build off that, Alexis and Chris, I think one of the things I've observed in my career is that sometimes the people defining the problem are the wrong people. And so I think it's important. I love that Kate's laughing at that. I think as someone who's been in the technology space and in product management and product development, I'm super comfortable sitting down with my engineering team or my product team and asking them, what can we do with this data? That is the biggest mistake I can often make. The question I need to be asking is, what have our clients, what have our partners, what is the market saying that is the problem? And making sure, rather, to the comment of overwhelm, to the comment of anything is possible, which are fundamental things I believe in, that is the right person asking the question, is the right person or the right group defining the problem. It's not always like Field of Dreams. You build it, they don't always.
Oh, it's excellent. Urban, I would imagine you've got something to add.
I do. So to Val's point and a little bit what Chris hit on, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have a basic question that you write on a whiteboard, and it has to say, what is the problem that we're trying to address? Period. If you go off and you try and cleanse data and do all these various pieces and parts, sometimes you can get by with just cleansing what you need, and then you just continue to build on top of that. So just making sure that the ROI, that you keep that front and center, so that you can continue to make the investments and do it in a meaningful way.
And Irvin, I wanted to just hear a little bit more about in your previous role when you were trying to bring together numerous groups that had their each siloed departments and data sets. How did you begin to even take the step to drive alignment to be able to have something of meaning for the whole organization?
And so it goes back to building relationships, and at the end of the day, helping everybody to understand the big picture and their part in it, that they still own the data. For instance, at the state of Ohio, I brought together 32 agencies, and in those 32 agencies, they all had their own separate data silos. So Jobs and Family Services would have their own, big data warehouse. Health would have their own. But at the end of the day, if we were to combine some of those things together, there's so many problems that we could solve for the citizens real time. And so after explaining, sitting down in several think tanks and think groups, you never do anything by yourself. So I've got some of the greatest minds and greatest folks that work with me. But we brought together the initiative and brought it to Governor DeWine and explained it to him. He said, "This is why aren't we already doing this? Let's make this happen." So we had an executive order that was put in place, and as a result of that, it constituted that you will work together versus lowering it up and trying to figure out ways why not to share the information. You still ended up owning the data, but that's how the Innovate Ohio platform came to be, and we were able to solve, for instance, African American babies were dying at a much higher rate, and we couldn't figure out why. But once we took data from health, data from Jobs and Family Services, data from the Treasury, next thing we knew, we found out very, very quickly where some of the things that we could help bring down some of those statistics. And really, it was just a matter of redirecting some funds. You didn't have to go and ask for new taxes. You just had to redirect funds to make sure that transportation was there, the insurance was being attached to the baby sooner rather than later. And we're starting to see that trend take place. So those just one example of something far greater. It's far greater meaning and bringing data together, and that's one that to this date has been a really, really meaningful job for me. You don't go there to get rich; you go there because you want to make a difference.
Yeah, that's an incredible outcome. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things we talked about the other day, Jason Holler, how we can actually leverage AI itself to help us for data readiness. Do you want to share some insights on that and some of the things we've done at 5 to Flow in that respect?
I think what you're referring to is adopting tools that act as layers between the actual user inputting the data and where you actually store the data. So, I mean, the biggest way we're using this is for sentiment style data, not like numbers and figures and whatnot. But I mean, a super simple way is you can just have note takers take notes for the meetings, and then that can get stored somewhere, not as a full transcript, but as chunked highlights and actions and takeaways and who's responsible for what. And so as we move into this age of AI, it's a whole new type of data that we can actually store now, or at least it's a more effective and efficient way that we can capture it and store it and sort through it. So that's like a whole new piece. So instead of training each and every one of us to take notes the exact same way and input those notes the exact same way into some database after meetings and try to capture in the exact same way who's responsible for what the actions and highlights and takeaways are. We just have AI do that in the same way every time for us. So we can create consistency using these layers of AI in the process. And I think that that will not necessarily solve old data problems, but it can certainly be effective at creating cleaner data moving forward. And that's a simple fix. That's not an expensive fix. That's something that's super simple that companies and just people in general can start to do moving forward to just ensure that whatever data is coming in starting now, it doesn't have some of the same problems that old data has, where maybe you need 1,000 users to all, put things in the exact same way. Like this number here is part of this category, is part of this overall project, and people just make mistakes. So eliminating that that burden on the actual user frees up some of their time and attention and energy to do their actual work instead of just trying to input data correctly. And it eliminates burden on the company who has to train all these people how to do that properly. So there's ways to integrate layers of AI in the process that can start to alleviate some of these issues that have been present in the past.
Thanks. And thinking about like the ways in which you can integrate AI to increase efficiencies. I know, Bill, we've seen just in the last year with your companies, great, great efficiency going forward. When we were talking about, for example, 10 years ago, we'd have to plug something into a data set, walk away, go get a cup of coffee,
Sure.
hang out the water cooler, we'd come back, we'd check on it. And now it's within seconds. You want to talk a little bit about that evolution and what you've even seen in the last year, 6 months, 3 months at your organizations?
Absolutely. I mean, the stuff that I'm seeing today, if you said even, 6 or 9 months ago, I would say we are years away from that. A tangible example, so Huckle, our data platform, everyone in this phone call is on Huckle. Every adult American is in Huckle. It's essentially not only your basic census data, but what you watch on Netflix and what podcasts you listen to and where your vacation. And every time you click something on an app to say share my data, we work with data aggregators that can pull that out. So for example, we do a lot of work in healthcare and public health, and a hospital could say, here's all the people that are made an appointment with their doctor and showed up, and here's all the people that did not. And there might be tens of thousands of patients in both those lists. And the original version of Huckle had 36 data points because that's really all we could handle. Now we're over 300 because the cost of data, access to data, AI has all sped that up. But even a year ago, we had an army of college interns that would then take, we could run the report quickly. That took no time to match these 5,000 patients, these 5,000 patients. But then you had college interns, using tools like Excel and scripts and saying, okay, of the 300 data points, oh wait, some come from multi-generational homes, or it's transportation, it's income, it's what kind of phone they have. And it was a lot of work. It would take them, weeks to do that process on one project. Today, it is truly less than a minute. So you can, my favorite story is a healthcare system where we had the records of these, if you're familiar with Epic, but essentially two groups of women who needed hip replacement surgery. They were the same age, they were the same race, they were the same income, they were from the same zip code. One group got hip replacement surgery, one did not. Last year, it would have taken those college interns and grad students a lot of time to go through every data point, do the math, do the calculus, find the anomalies. In less than a minute, Huckle said, oh, the difference is, and it's obvious when you hear it, women who live in multi-generational homes will get the surgery because they either have a young mom or an older daughter who can run the household while they're recovering from hip replacement surgery. The moms who aren't in multi-generational homes tend to not get the surgery. You say that, everyone around the table nodded their head yes, but this hospital system had spent months trying to solve that, because on paper, same age, race, gender, income, and zip code. What's the difference? We've taken that process from 2 to 3 weeks of analytics work to less than a minute.
Yeah, it reminds me of when Douglas shared that the idea of making the data sing by using your imagination.
Yeah.
So Douglas, do you have some examples of thinking about, at your organization, there's numerous brands. I would imagine numerous data sets that fall under each brand, possibly siloed, like most organizations are. Have there been any wins or anything that you are looking forward to the organization taking on to be able to drive greater alignment between like more of the technology side of the business and the non-tech?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Just really quickly, just the top two that are kind of my recent favorites. And I just want to make a mention of this, the Fortune Brands, we very much are instituting a culture of wanting that change and embracing change, which is hard for some and easier for others, but it's really foundational to allow for new implementation. And on a base level, we've been foundationally working to position our data so that it's kind of a single source of truth. So that kind of underpins what I'm about to say as an essential element. But one of the things that we were able to do is centralize a lot of the um, technical documentation for our products, like bill of materials, process, how to make them, schematics, things like that. And unfortunately, because of comedy of errors throughout time and space leading up to the present, all the materials and how to make them weren't included in a really nice document or database. And so, but we had all these schematics. So we fed, I think it was over 10 million different product documents, each of them several hundred pages long, into um, a neural network. And it was able to spit out with, when we did spot checking, I think it had like a 94% accuracy on what materials are in there. And for a manufacturing company that makes a lot of things out of metal, and the new tariff environment, this is a huge cost savings because there were a number of products that we didn't know what exactly the materials were that were being made out of. We knew in general, but specifically when making planning, um, you know, things like our supply chain, refactoring, redundancy, making huge decisions that costs tens or hundreds of millions of dollars if we need to reposition something. Like these are big decisions. And so we were able to do that very, very well through the AI generation. That was really interesting because we were taking, people that have no idea on data, but we were able to take these documents and really put in their hands something that they can use, which was fantastic. And then the other one is semantic models. People don't know people don't know SQL or database languages, but we were developing semantic models, AI models that sit on top of our sales data or our finance data and say, what is the top seller of our product lists in the last 13 weeks for this section of the country and this whatever, and it just spits out an answer in plain language, which is that's huge. That puts the power of data into decision makers' hands instantly. Right. So that's huge.
Well, and I think we talked a little bit about that in the prep, as that translation of the complexity of the data and AI side to the actual outcome. What can they do with it? What is the value? And we just heard from Bill, Irvin, and Douglas, these 3 business cases that were, incredible outcomes for their various organizations and for the communities at large as well. So wanted to bring it back to Kate and ask, what is at stake then for organizations that are not engaging in the AI readiness and developing their data strategy, in preparation for these next steps? I mean, I think we're clearly seeing that ROI is going to be left on the table. What is your vision for this about, we're called Rewire or Retire. That's the name of our webinar. So what's your thought?
Well, I feel like it goes back to our philosophy of what's the human intelligence component and the storytelling piece. So when you tell these as stories, like Irvin's story with the hospitals, and each of the stories Bill, Doug, Chris, Val have shared, that the one I'll share that Doug just instigated in my brain was the neural network concept of AI and how that influences behavior. So this is I'm in a Tesla in the back seat in Ohio, and it's on auto drive, and my friend's Tesla stops like, 10 yards before the stop sign and then jets forward as a truck's coming where there's not a stop sign. And I freak out, but then it stopped again. And I was like, why would they program it that way? And he said, it's not a program, it's a neural network. And it's gathering driving behaviors and creating the driving out of this neural network. And I'm like, do we really want the world's drivers in charge of how this car drives? And so why I'm sharing that story is the whole piece here of what's important on the human intelligence side of all of this AI side, right? Is what is our role to continue developing our discernment of the data, of what AI gives us, and connect that to each of these stories and question it, going back to session 2 on curiosity and saying, do I want to jut forward at a stop sign, even though I know it's going to stop again? But is that like really a good behavior for the truck that was coming to see that behavior of how people drive? So it just begs the question of where we're thinking the purpose of these webinars as leaders with AI. We have a responsibility not only to promote use, but also promote curiosity, some skepticism, discernment, and layering in who we are and what we know as humans to then continue sharing the heart stories behind it. And I know Jason and I have been on a couple webinars talking about where AI is building more empathy and being able to tell stories. And as I've coached my own clone to know how I talk and how I speak and how I write and how I communicate, to build those things into the data I present. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at the data and not either saying, oh shit, I got to do something, or oh yay, we're performing, it's useless, right? So if it's not actionable, if it's not telling a story that you can do something about, and it's not accurate or in a way that combines the human intelligence piece, we're going to be at a loss. So that's kind of my context. I know, Bill, I'm super curious on your side of that, knowing human behavior is so much part of your company and understanding the psychographics and predictability of us. That neural network, did it predict we're just gonna jet forward and that's we're terrible drivers, so therefore we're programming cars to do that on our behalf?
I think we're still very much in a phase. It's this phrase "human in the loop," and I really like that because we can, just at a conference even last week, we talked about tools like Huckle or other data platforms. First, we get all excited because before, Procter and Gamble and Nike had access to data like this for decades. It was expensive and it was slow, but now anyone can have, the data, the AI, the access is more widely available. But I think that's the risk, is the almost running the stop sign, is taking the human out of the loop and relying solely on AI.
Right.
And missing that creativity, there's a reading of the tea leaves. So while, tools like Huckle and other tools can say, we recommend, an advertisement that has a married couple with young kids and a golden retriever on the beach based on all these demographic and psychographics of your audience. One of my colleagues, she focuses on the cultural and emotional connection, and great example, going back to the hip replacement surgery. She has said, so part of our action was, okay, if you were a physician and a woman comes through and needs hip replacement surgery, but you see she's not in a multi-generational home, there are interventions you have, and one could be talking to your husband or your kids about how they're going to have to be more involved in the household. And she said, my colleague, I was sharing the story, and she said, well, in our cultural consulting, we would tell you there are certain cultures where that's just not acceptable, where the husband is never going to be part of the household. There are very clear, gender division of roles. And so you can make that recommendation. But if it is a family from certain cultures, you need to have, Huckle can tell you that's the answer, but it can't say necessarily within these cultures without a lot of training and a human who reads those. So I would argue, I unfortunately, I believe there's a case where we are going to train AI to identify some of those things more, but in today's world, you still need that human in the loop, that spark, that creativity, that connections that takes a human brain to realize.
I love that phrase, human in the loop. And I think there's like the light side and there's the dark side of everything. And Val, you and I have talked a bit about the bias that comes into our data because of the human in the loop. So I'm going to go around and we'll finish our panel today with closing statements, but just advice for those leaders that are listening to our webinar today. If Val, if we can start with you, thinking about that bias that we're sometimes not as discerning as we need to be. If we can just close with some thoughts from you on that, and then I'll go to each one of the panelists and ask for just a more general thought that you would like to share with leaders as they're looking to adopt AI and get their data strategy together for their next steps.
Sure, and I'm gonna pull on where Bill left off with the human on the loop. You know, I was at a conference a bit ago where they talked about human in the loop, on the loop, and out of the loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where does the person sit? I love that there are going to be situations where a human out of the loop will be the right decision for where we go. My opinion, my perspective is that a human on the loop is always going to be important if the problem that you're trying to solve, the value that you're bringing, impacts people, culture, processes. Because of the human nature, the human need, the awareness of cultural diversity that is necessary to check and balance the recommendations. Bill's example, I think, is a great one. And so when I think about it from a leader perspective, from a leadership perspective, again, starting small, starting with what is the problem? What is the value of the problem? How can AI help me solve this problem faster or better with different people, different processes? What is that right way to think about this? And then how will I know that that's been a success?
Well said. Chris, would you like to leave us with some closing thoughts?
Be very interesting, being that my background is in banking. And it's so structured outside your little walled unit about what you can do. We did a lot of work inside, but you have to be really careful about what we would pull from the outside and mixing that with that. Maybe you have a link between two data sets. I don't know, but that would be, just listening to that, it just opens up a whole nother world because of data governance and all the other controls around it on the financial side. But I'd say that with probably anything, and just be really careful when you start mixing things, know exactly what you're doing.
Absolutely. Getting all of that set up in the front.
Yep.
Irvin, some last thoughts?
Certainly, not only is there power in data, but there's also the catchphrase of an old TV show I used to watch. There's gold in those hills. There's money. There's money in data if you can leverage it appropriately. And as we think about going into this, from an AI is here, and it's using the data. So that's why right now you have to go back and double check it. You can't just turn it in. There's going to be things that are just not right. It'll get you 80% there, but you got to go and take a look at that. So it kind of gets back to the human loop, human in the loop. But there's data, there's power in data, and there's money in data.
Douglas, some last thoughts?
Yeah, it can't be really overstated. I love the emphasis on people, right? Like AI doesn't operate in a vacuum. If you don't have someone interacting with it or kind of alongside of it, it may be doing something, but it's not really touching the world in the ways that we think traditionally about it. And so it's really AI in relationship to people, but it's not just people in isolation, right? Because whenever there's people, there's culture, right? And then whenever you get people around together, like there's processes, technology, and analytics. But I do want to say, like, about that, forming the problem and getting that idea, what are we trying to do, is really foundational. I've heard a lot of people say that. I think the next step is, like, do we have what we need? And I think foundationally, like, you can use dirty data and there's ways of treating it, but, like, is the way that the things is our data set up in a way that is useful? Do we need to put some effort into it before we just look to strap on an AI, before we look to buy a tool? Bill talked about that, really assessing things before implementation. And I think that really cannot be overstated. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Planning, spending the time on the front end is really so important. And it's a panacea for a lot of things. So I just want to say that.
Thank you. I think, well, first, well done integrating the 5 core elements. So that was fantastic. And again, I think the core of this is saying that, so how important the role of people still are in all of this, and if we're able to create environments in which people can try new things. I mean, it's that we have to be able to be open to experimenting. And Irvin, on the last webinar, you talked about like that these are kind of just our safe creative places. There's not a whole lot of risk when we're just, testing some new things out. We don't have to go and then turn it on, but we can try things and we can ask new questions. And that's, we're hearing kind of a repeated theme around that. Jason Haller, you want to share any last thoughts that we would want to leave with some leaders that are watching today?
Yeah, just on a more casual note, more from the perspective of how we access data, especially now that with AI platforms, even just something similar like ChatGPT, information is data, and we can now access data using natural language more than we ever could before. So the power of the prompt is also more important than it ever has been before. And kind of like Doug was saying, you have to spend, just like putting the data in the database in the first place, putting the prompt together, you need to spend the time up front. So, what is the total context? The more information you give in your prompt, the more specificity, the more guardrails. What do I want specifically? Where do I want to get it from specifically? Is it the whole internet? Probably going to get bad data back. Do I know some specific expert places where I want to be getting my data from? That needs to go in my prompt. So the role of the human is right now in curating these really good prompts that can parse through a lot of noise and get to something that's actually usable data-wise. And then also using discernment on the other end, like, well, I still have to read it and make sure that it makes sense. But just the power of the prompt, putting the time in on the front end, being real specific with your questions, even using some tools like there's a website called Prompt Cowboy where you can put in your version of a prompt and then it will turn it into a much more detailed prompt. And it can kind of multiply the type of output that you can get just from the large language models. But that's all I wanted to leave people with, just something super easy and practical.
Yeah, thank you. Bill, some last thoughts?
Yeah, just real quick, 4-part tactical test we use, and I would recommend if you're looking for a place to start with AI, look at this 4-part test. 1, does it solve a real problem? So it's not just for fun, it's a real pain point. 2, can you get consensus? So your compliance folks, your regulatory, your IT, they're going to be on board. They're not going to stop you from doing it. 3, super tactical, but it makes things go fast. Look for a structured data set. So if it's free-form data that requires a lot of engineering, people will run out of gas, people won't get excited. But if it's a form fill where it is nice and structured and clean, you can move so much faster. And then 4, can you show an impact pretty quickly, whether that's revenue, efficiency, social benefit, whatever it is. If you can pass that 4-part test, you can run a beautiful pilot and build consensus in your company.
I think some of our best clips for social are going to come out of the last closing statements. So well done, everyone. I'm going to pass it to Kate for some last thoughts as we're wrapping up our 3rd of our webinar series.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you all for your insights and stories. A huge component of the human side is the oxytocin we release while talking and telling stories and sharing all of the similar experiences we've had and sharing the new ones to us. So love to see you all on the next one where we continue this journey of the various aspects of Gray Eye, and as senior leaders, dispelling the fear, promoting flow, preventing burnout, making the world of work a better place with your insights and tips and tricks. So thank you so much for being here. We're super grateful and hope to see you again on another webinar soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
This was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.